Good evening. This is Defacto Review, a weekly analysis of Mongolia's latest political, economic, and social issues by economist and columnist Mr. D.Jargalsaikhan.
Good evening.
And I'll be your host, Tikshirult. Today's topics are the state budget for next year, the issue of domestic violence in Mongolia, and the situation of Russian citizens living and residing in Mongolia. So our first topic is a very big event that happened last week. So the budget law was passed, but with a 1.4 trillion MNT deficit. So last week, the parliament approved the 2023 budget law, and in the state budget, the revenue is projected to be about 19 trillion MNT, or 34.9% of the GDP. And spending is estimated to be at 20.4 trillion MNT, which is 37.6% of the GDP. So that means there is going to be a deficit of 1.4 trillion tugruks. And the Minister of Finance assured that the government will take measures to keep the budget deficit at target level and to stabilize the economy and maintain fiscal discipline at all levels for next year. And the government expects the economy to grow by about 5% and plans to reduce the inflation rate to single-digit levels for next year. And the opposition party, the Democratic Party, expressed that they have opposed this budget law since the beginning, and they pointed out that even though the authorities said they would cut down costs, the current expenses have increased by 480 billion tugruks for next year's budget. So my very first question to you is, what does it mean for the budget to pass with a deficit?
Yes, that's the core of this year's budget. Mm-hmm. It is equivalent of 2.6% of the GDP, mm-hmm. which the government says is way less than last year, mm-hmm. which is true. And now 2.6% is still a big deficit. It's 1.4 trillion. Mm-hmm. So why this year budget was supposed to be no deficit? Two reasons. One is we have spent 15 trillion MNT for last 2 years during COVID to fight COVID. It includes many social care, even payment of the electricity, etc. So it's almost like a budget size separately spent. Mm-hmm. So this makes already the fiscal deficit very hard already, first. Secondly, we are to pay 1.3 billion USD bond money next year. Mm-hmm. And it's most likely they will refinance it, the beautiful name given to pay debt with new debt. Mm-hmm. So that's what's going to happen. But however, whether international investors will allow us to do so or not, because still the Mongolian government is it fiscally prudent or not? Mm-hmm. So when you go with a deficit at the time after COVID, that's very hard. So that's why if they allow or if the conditions will be favorable, then it will be raised another bond money and pay these 1.3. Otherwise, the foreign currency reserve of the country is substantially now lower than a year before, and now it's around 2.6 or so billion US dollar, and we have to pay from that. Then we will remain only around 1 billion US dollar, which is not covering 4-5 months of our import, which will immediately create new conditions for, in a fiscal term and monetary term, there will be immediately, the exchange rate is today 3,400 already, and it will jump up on one side. On the other side, we were talking about the mortgage, for example, and this is also a huge deficit, creating deficit, which is on the shoulder of the central bank. It is budgetary work. It's supposed to be in the balance of the government, which they cannot afford because government has already big debt. So that's the specific of this deficit, the budget of this year. But I would like to particularly highlight that the child money is around 4% of GDP.
And they're planning on increasing it or they're planning to provide child money to almost 90% of households?
Of children.
Of children.
This household has to, a family should have more than 3.5 million MNT per month income. If you're above that, you don't get the child money. If you're lower, you will receive it. Still, it's altogether only 10% cut from this 4% of GDP. If they cut twice, or they don't give every child, they give only the most needy family children, if they cut it twice, then we would have the budget without deficit. So we should understand one thing, that everything money goes as a care will brings more debt to Mongolia. So now question is, can we afford borrowing in US dollar money and just giving for food? Instead, I'm not against taking care of the children, but I'm against this money goes to children which no need that money. So the country should be very specific on that. The real taking care of children is bigger investment in education, better teacher training, better classrooms, more schools close to home. This kind of things I would rather do with the money rather giving just for food.
Let's talk about the revenue for next year. So coal exports account for 1/4 of our revenue for next year. The estimation is that it is going to account for 25%. And coal export is projected to be at 36.5 million tons. And on estimation, 2.5 trillion tugruks will be collected from mineral royalties. And 1 trillion tugruks will be collected from corporate income tax. So they're very dependent on coal exports. So do you think that these projections are accurate? And
1/3 of our budget revenue comes from mining sector, which includes mostly two minerals, copper and coal, both almost the same level. But 36 million tons of coal is possible if there is no Chinese border closure again. There is logistics working well. Then 36 is okay. But this year now only 20 plus million tons. Plus we have a problem, as we discuss now in all country, is about this misuse of the coal resources by people closely connected with, politically closely connected people. So suppose 36 million tons will be sold, but about the copper, about the same size revenue it brings, and a royalty, as you said. But one thing, the tax revenue comes as a royalty, but the other thing, that royalty goes to local people where the mine are developed or produced. So these are the issues, and again, we are staying dependent on mineral raw materials, so it needs the part of budget to go for more diversifying the economy. So that part, in Mongolia, each minister has own portfolio of money. And it's important thing not only to spend, but what are the results. That's what the people should know.
So another change that came within the budget law for next year was the certain increases in in salaries for government jobs. So they're going to make substantial increases in posts in the countryside, so not in the capital city, and they're raising salaries for certain government jobs. I think it was around 6%, but it's a lot less than what the inflation percentage is now. So do you think that this raise is substantial enough to help people's lives? Or?
Well, we have a 1 million reserve of human resources, out of which a quarter works for public. And the salary all around the country are lower if you compare it with inflation of 14.5%. This year we have reached it. And next year the government promises only 8%, but it's almost impossible, particularly if we don't increase the productivity of the whole country. For public offices, they are doing a new system now, rating differently, and the public officer will receive. But the problem with increase of salary for public officers are becoming always a big pressure on the private sector. More people want to go to public sector, and it is very hard for private sector to catch up that level of salary. So it creates more cost for businesses and less profit, of course, and less for investment, the reinvestment. So increasing salary for public officer sounds good for one part of the population, but not good for the other part of population. So it has two ends.
Let's move on to our second topic. Last week, the certain law enforcement agencies in Mongolia, the UN Population Fund in Mongolia, and the Swiss Agency for Development and Cooperation held a conference on combating domestic violence in Mongolia. And at this conference, there were over 800 attendees, including representatives from all 21 provinces and 9 districts of Ulaanbaatar. And to share some statistics on domestic violence, 31.2% of all women in Mongolia experience physical or sexual intimate partner violence, meaning domestic violence in their lifetimes. So this is a very major issue here in Mongolia. And what do you think what steps should be taken to combat this problem?
Yes, there was a 735 teams working for combating the violence, domestic violence, against domestic violence, combating domestic violence. Yes, it's fifth forum, they do it. We have a law against domestic violence from 2004, amended in 2017, more specifically what happens if domestic violence happens, what to do, and if it's repeatedly done, then what to do, very, very more clear. That law is in force now, and as a result now we have, for example, a care center for victims of domestic violence. And the statistics says also 15% of all calls coming to the police are related to domestic violence. It's very specific crime, which is happening beyond the eyes of the other people, only those what is inside they know. And important thing is what happened after if it happened. But the most important thing is what we can do all together to prevent that domestic violence. And it's in the mind of people. And it is not necessarily only poor people makes this violence. Rich people do too, but only the calling rate after that for wealthier family less than the other family. So the main issue is prevention. how to prevent. It's in the mind of the people. It's an issue of personal, that bringing up who was in, how was in that person's childhood, and what is the culture, education, bringing up, all many social characteristics of people are combined, intervened together, and we need to address those only issues, and we need to address it by whole society, not only this police, this team. That team is including, for example, horo, head, or social worker in each horo, the smallest unit, administrative unit in the country. So, and at this fifth forum, they discussed they need certain financing, which is very miserable compared with what they do. But however, if they will start increasing, then there will be separate office, all this, running that office altogether. It would be triggering more larger volumes of expenses. So that's the answer.
So on the issue of the social workers, so the main problem is that the job is not very desirable for many people.
Because it's very low paid. In the remote areas, it's very hard work. You need to walk. There's no bus stations. And in some places in Ulaanbaatar city, where more than half of population lives, many people half of them live in a remote Gir district. And for one social worker, in some places, 5,000 families belong. In some small, in particular center, that very high density places, horo are more smaller, more fragmented. Maybe some horo and social worker have only 500 families, for example. So it's a really unequal job with the same equal salary, which is very small. So that's the reason.
So should we be putting more emphasis on creating this workforce or training more people to be social workers and improving the situation? So maybe by, as you said, maybe setting like a quota for one social worker. So do you think those are possible solutions? What do you think should be done in that
certainly case? The social worker salary a bit to be increased and more equally distributed, the load of the worker. And of course, the most job is to be made in the mind of everybody, each family, every man, every woman in the country, where violence is no good. You should love people close to you. Respect. So respect each other. And it's a huge social issue. And as you said, 1/3 of women in the country in their lifetime being a victim of domestic violence. It's a very high number. So it's mostly we have a lot to do by whole society together. It's a mindset, it's culture, and I think our art also to address these issues. But with the solutions, not the bad end. So many things in that regard to be done. And at the forum, good thing is they have this forum. They discuss what is done, what is not done, what is to be done. And now this time they bring particular issue of financing of those team of people. And the result, what they have done, that's good work. And we should do it every year. And every family, every person is to think about domestic violence as a truly very specific bad crime. That's the mindset we need to change.
Definitely. Let's move on to our third topic for this week. So towards the end of September, we had an influx of Russian citizens coming into Mongolia. mostly through the land border. And within a month of that time, 85% of these Russian citizens that had arrived in Mongolia left Mongolia, either back to Russia or to a different country. So one thing that was surprising was that little over 1,200 people arrived through the Chinggishang airport, but more than 3,000 people left through the airport. So one can see that people are arriving through the land border and leaving through the airports. So this may be due to the fact that Russian citizens are able to enjoy a 30-day visit to Mongolia with the possibility of an extension of another 30 days. But there are, even though 85% had left, I think the number is even more now because this was after 1 month. There are a lot of Russian citizens that intend on staying in Mongolia. Over 800 people have extended their visas, and a study by the National Chamber of Commerce and Industry surveyed 426 Russian nationals, and 42.1% of them said that they had some understanding of the Mongolian language, and 28.3% of them, of these people surveyed, plan to permanently settle in Mongolia. So, do you think that this is possible? Because we would have to approve a lot of these people for work visas or long-term stay visas, right?
The statistics, national statistics, say that by the end of third quarter of this year, compared with the last year at the same time, over 100,000 Russians came as tourists, a visa category tourists, and those including all of what we are talking about. And I just checked it with the immigration office. 6,000 of them have extended for next 30 days because Russian citizens can come to Mongolia without visa for 30 days, and they can extend once another 30 days. So far, 6,000 people, and 800 only people have got a job or any other. It's called residence permission, and by having a job contract for 6 months, then they pay, the employer pays a certain amount of money to immigration office for hiring a foreigner. If in that case they receive permanent permission, and only 800 people got that permission. But my attention, more people comes, it's good for the economy, and they spend money for renting, for food, for other things, and actually, but the issue is the Russians are 85% are leaving somehow. So it gives me a thought: is Mongolia a good place for Russians to live? Looks like no, and we need a lot to improve. We should think over that again. How the streets names to be in 2 languages, to be friendly, right? It's only in Mongolian now all around. Now, all capital city, I think, except Ulaanbaatar, has 2 signs in English and in their own language, for example. It should be services. So in particular, we should pay attention more to our neighbors, to these languages to be spoken somehow. And also all the living conditions. So Russia is a rich, big country compared with Mongolia. So the people's demand are different. That's why they are not living in Mongolia. An interesting thing is, according to the survey you are referring to by the Chamber of Commerce, it says that they have asked the questions. So 28% said that tourism, 18% said to find a job, 12% to study, 7.4% friends to meet friends and families. 21% is running away from this partial mobilization, started since the September 21. By the way, this statistics from the immigration office is from September 21, okay, not the whole year. 6,000 people got the additional permission to the visa to stay, and 800 found jobs and permanent residence permission. They got it. Interesting. The other thing is 75% of those who said that they will invest in Mongolia. There's a 75% in trading, 12% in IT, 43% less than $10,000, 25% $100,000 to $200,000 investment planning. That's what they said. That statistic sounds interesting for me also. So I was expecting this IT a little bit more, only 12% of those who are going to invest. And there are 40% are renting apartments, 39% are staying in a hotel, for example. It's good income for a hotel, but is again, our hotels to be also more to meet those demands the Russian is asking.
So this also brings light to a problem that we may be facing for next year, because next year is declared to be, as the government says, the year to visit Mongolia. So do we need to, take lessons from this to maybe be more accommodating to visitors for next year, to gather more revenue on tourism? So maybe like increasing the number of available rooms, or improving the services of these hotels.
We need to reconsider a whole hospitality industry of Mongolia, and it's not only Ulaanbaatar issue. We have now good roads between IMAX, and then it's a place stopover maybe every 100 kilometers or so, places where they can have a coffee, some restroom, etc. And that work is to be planned right now, so that in the spring, when the spring comes, they start the construction. And yes, reconsider again our system of hospitality industry, ranking those who are providing services, in particular in countryside. So with all together, this kind of synchronic effort of every player, stakeholders of this industry, we need to change completely the industry and service.
Thank you for tuning in to Defacto Review. This has been Defacto Review, a weekly analysis of Mongolia's latest political, economic, and social issues by economist and columnist Mr. D.Jargalsaikhan.
Thank you very much for watching us. See you next week.